Hi, everybody. This is a continuation of my series where we're chatting with every mom. Um, Although every mother is different and every childbirth experience is different and every woman is different. So I'm speaking today with Pamela. Pamela, would you mind introducing yourself to our listeners?
Sure. Hi, my name is Pamela Schneider, Pam Rocks, a few different names. And I'm a creative director in entertainment industry. I write and direct shows and work for Moment Factory currently, or before I was on maternity, and was I started that company with the founders 21 years ago, and I'm a little bit nomadic as well and worked all over the world. Lived in Israel, Ethiopia, Paris, many different places, and I'm currently in Montreal.
And you're a mother.
And I am currently 100% a mother.
So I've always loved listening to birth stories, and I know some of our listeners do too. So I don't want you to go into all the details, but let us hear your birth story.
Yes. So I planned to have a home birth and always envisioned my birth as being extremely, oh, my baby's coughing. Always, visualized my birth being at home in water or nearby water, having water involved. And I prepared my birth to be exactly that. I actually had delivered a baby. I actually delivered a baby alone in a home with an amazing mother who gave birth for the first time in Hawaii, just in a yurt with not even a car around or anywhere, and not even knowing what the hospital was. So I had a very strong belief and did a lot of work on releasing any kind of fear surrounded around childbirth. And so I really was super excited to have my own birth in that way. And being in Montreal at the time, I needed to work with a birth a facilitator, and so I was with the midwives at the birthing center at Maison de Naissance Côte de Neige, and they followed me, and we seemed to have a very similar perspective, or they were listening to my birth wishes in terms of really believing that if we release any fear, that we could use words like surges, or take out any words that were related to pain being a negative thing, or just even for pain, just thinking of it as a new sensation that we'd never felt before. And I was doing the hypnobirthing exercises every day, and I was reading a lot of books, and every day would have these amazing dreams about my birth experience. And then labor started, and I went into latent phase labor. My due date was the 18th of December, and around the 13th, I started getting some contractions, and they weren't regular. So I was still very much in touch with my midwives at the time, and they just, of course, they said, count the 511. So when they start to be every 5 minutes for 1 minute for an hour, then give us a call. So the contractions were sometimes regular, but not consistently for an hour. And then they would stop, and I was able to sleep at night. And so I was getting pretty excited. We filled up the bath and the house, and everything was ready. I had, my incense, my candles. We even put on like a neon sign with a pregnant mom image on the window, so everyone knew that I was going into labor. And around the 18th, this went on for a couple of days, around the 18th of December, when she was actually due, they started to be more regular. And they were about every 5 minutes, for a minute, for an hour. And I called my midwife, and it was late at night. So she just said, well, try and lie down and see if they continue. Because she asked me if I had any pain, which I had asked her not to do. But anyway, I didn't have any pain. I mean, it was uncomfortable, but I wouldn't consider that it was painful. So she asked me to lie down, and so I did, and I was able to fall asleep. And the next day, nothing happened in the day, but around when night fell, when it got dark in the house, again they started. And again, she asked me to lie down first to sleep, and if I could sleep, that it would be fine. So again, they stopped. And then the next day, they started to get more intense. So I would consider I had a little bit of pain, or the comfort was more stronger. And she decided to come to the house and check me, because she was going out of town the next day. So she just wanted to see kind of where I was at. So she came by the house and she checked, and I was about, I think, around 2 centimeters dilated. So not much, but something was happening. And so she again just said, keep going through the contractions, and if you can lie down and fall asleep, then it's still latent labor. So that happened. Then they went on for about 3 hours that one night, and got really intense, and I had to hang on these rings that I had put in, and every time I would hang on the rings, I could release any kind of discomfort that I had. But again, after those 3 hours, I went to sleep and I fell asleep. So they stopped again. The next day, I got a call from the birthing center, and they had told me that 2 of the midwives were diagnosed with COVID-19. And that about, I don't know how many of the midwives, something like 10 of the other midwives had to go into quarantine because they somehow were in contact with the 2 people that had COVID, including my 2 midwives. So that was hugely shocking, and all of a sudden put this really lot of fear into my system, which I had been working so hard in getting rid of. And I was super freaked out, because with that, they also said, well, I'm no longer allowed to do a home birth, because they don't have enough resources to send, if they have somebody in labor at the birthing center, they can't send 1 or 2 midwives to my house to facilitate my home labor. So that, was a complete, I know that, I've done also a lot of work that knowing and accepting and embracing that every birth there, you can't expect anything, and you have to go with the flow and let whatever happen. But as much as I prepared for that, I still was not willing to let go of my home birth experience that I had visualized so much and prepared for in my beautiful space. So that's where I met Rivka. Actually, I called a few people. Actually, a cousin of mine had told me at one point when hi Bupa, we're talking about you. When I had told her that I couldn't find a midwife at the beginning of my pregnancy because they were all full, she had told me that she knew of a midwife that doesn't work with one of the birthing centers, that you could work with potentially privately or something. She didn't really exactly know, but anyway, at this point, I called her and I said, who's that person you were mentioning? So I got on the phone with Rivka, who totally helped me calm myself down, remember my strengths, remember that, it's a mother-led birth, and that I'm in control. Well, I'm not in control of the birth now, me and the baby is, but that I need to connect with my instincts again, and connect with my visualization, and really feel into what I need to do, and kind of gave me some options in terms of protocols and what's happening in the public health system of Quebec. And it was definitely a little bit of I felt like I was on a little bit of a wobbly, just unstable ground, let's just say, because if I stayed and continued to do my home birth, I had also a wonderful doula who was one of Rivka's students, Bria, who also was following me and with me during this experience. And So, she was part of the scenario of the option of, okay, well, Bria could be with me at home. And if I feel like my birth is going to go as smoothly as it was going in my dreams, I could potentially continue to do my birth at home and my husband would be there and the bath is there. And if I felt like she was just coming the way I had envisioned, then I could continue that. And Rivka can be on call to be there and support me as well. But I also needed to know and realize that legally, no one no one within that support network that would be with me would be able or legally allowed to check my cervix or cut the umbilical cord of the baby, or do anything, I guess, related to anything medical, which, even though I believed I wouldn't need any of those things, it also made me feel unsafe to not have that as an option if I needed, when I delivered the baby in Hawaii, she thought she would just want to be totally alone. And in the end, after 4 hours of contractions, she was like, "Can you check my cervix?" And I was like, "I don't even know what a cervix is." But so I remembered that moment, and I was like, I might want somebody to check my cervix at a certain point. So I still had that as an option. I was like, okay, well, if the contractions go and I feel strong, Rivka helped me understand that I just needed to trust my mother's instincts and trust what I was feeling, and that at the time when active labor started, I would know. And I actually felt that as soon as she said that, I was like, yeah, I'll know as soon as this labor starts again, I'll know. Meanwhile, all of the contractions that I had been having for those 4 days stopped during these 2 days of limbo. And I talked to the birthing center, and the reason also I was so needing to stay at home is I also didn't feel so safe about going to the birthing center, which, even though they did take a lot of protocols, there were still 2 midwives that had COVID there, and who knows where they got them, and we don't know that much about COVID, so it also freaked me out a little bit to be there. So I felt like both my places were unsafe. So in a couple of days, speaking a lot with you, Rivka, which thank you again, just helping me again find my ground. I guess finally Nafi, the name of my baby, decided that she was, that the space was safe again and she could start trying. And I also felt that my husband too was really supportive, and it's like, you know what, you'll just know, you just got to go with the flow. Like there was always the option of calling 911 and having the paramedics come and weigh the baby when she's born, and that we had our options, and I felt safe. And the contractions started pretty much clockwork once I felt safe again, and the intensity rose. They were stronger than they were before, and I had this one night where they got so intense. I was literally between the bathroom and the rings that I had set up and the bath, just going in circles, always in movement. Felt like this was happening, she's coming. But during the contractions, which now having gone through labor, I know is very strange, I could feel Nafi, my baby, like wiggling. She was frantically squirming during the contraction. So every time I'd have this contraction, I'd feel this intense pressure and this sort of pushing. But at the same time, I could feel her frantically moving around like I'd never felt her before. And at the time, I was excited by it because midwives would always say, make sure she's moving. Can you feel her moving? That's really important. So I was like, yeah, I can feel her moving. She's moving crazy. Like I've never felt her before. But I remember telling my midwife that, and her being like squiggling frantically during the contraction at the same time as the contraction. I was like, yeah, every time I'd get a contraction, she'd like freak out. So now, after that happened that went on for, I don't know, 4 hours, something like that. And I spoke to Rivka, I think, I'm not exactly remember when, but ended up lying down, and they slowed down and they stayed while I was lying down, but they got a lot softer and she stopped squiggling. And the next day I woke up, maybe I slept a couple hours, 2 hours or something like that, and the contractions had stopped again all day. And I remember speaking to Rivka, you were telling me, like, you have to listen to the baby. Maybe she's trying to tell you something, or, something's maybe going on. And I'm trying to remember exactly what happened. I think at this point I was now at 40, maybe 41 weeks. And that night again, they started, but I didn't feel Nafi in the same way, and the intensity wasn't as strong. And again, my midwife, who was still in quarantine, she was still talking to me and following me, and she was saying, maybe you should go, to the birthing center, and maybe just try and see if you can like pump and sort of be already in a safe place, already know the room, because I also had never seen the rooms over there. And they had one room with a bath. So I really wanted to be in a bath when I gave birth. So they were like, look, that room's available right now. Why don't you come to the birthing center? Maybe the fact that you're here will help the labor continue. Maybe, because I know that one of the fears that I tried to work through was that when I go into active labor, I didn't want to have to transition to a new location. I wanted to be that's why I wanted to be at home. I just wanted to be at home when it started, because I had a feeling that like having to go in the car for 25 minutes and then getting to a new space and then not being comfortable might also stop my labor. So I was like, okay, so let me go to the birthing center. So I went there and I pumped and we like prepared the room and nothing happened. So I went home, and this kind of went on until I was at 42 weeks. At which point the midwives are not allowed to follow me anymore. And the only option would be at home and do an illegal birth with no support, or with support, but no one that is legally allowed to touch me, or be at the hospital. And at this point, also my naturopath was also helping me and with Rizka's support, and the naturopath and Bria, who all were creating this amazing mother circle around me, helped me just realize, like, maybe Nafi wants to be at the hospital. Maybe that's why she's waiting. Maybe something's wrong. Maybe she's giving you a sign. And it kept coming back to me that time that she was squiggling inside of me, because it felt like she was going to come that day, but that squiggle, it was really frantic, It wasn't smooth. Not that birth has to be smooth, but it especially now that I felt contractions for another 28 hours after that, it definitely was not normal the way she was squiggling. So I was like, okay, maybe she does just want to be at the hospital. Maybe that's what she needs to feel safe. And I need to listen to that. So I went to the hospital, but I wasn't fully convinced. I still had one shot left. So when I got to the hospital, I did the NTS, or the non-stress test, NST test, and Nafi was fine. Her heartbeat was fine. Everything was good. I was, I think, at like 2 centimeters at this point still. So nothing had changed. And they said that, look, since everything looks good, we'll let you continue with the midwife for 24 hours. So you can essentially, give birth at the maison de naissance if you go into labor in the next 24 hours, which, wasn't very freeing, but a little bit of time constraint on me, which definitely I think is like anti-productive for going into labor. But they suggested putting a Foley inside me. So that's like a balloon that they blow up to, I think, 3 or 4 centimeters, they put inside, and then attach this rubber to your leg. And so every time you move or squat or go up the stairs, you're sort of pulling on this sort of faux head. Like they make this fake head that would push down on your cervix so it opens you up. So I decided to put that in, which when they described it to me, I didn't realize it would be attached to my leg and pulling it out, but which was super uncomfortable. But anyways, they put in this Foley, and I went home, and they were kind of like, well, if something's pushing down on your cervix, maybe it'll start your labor and you'll go, into active labor without it being induced in any other way. So I went home, and it started opening up. I started getting these even more intense contractions. I went in the bath, and actually I had this mother's circle. I did this mother's blessing about a month before, where there were about 40 women that are close to me of all ages gathered on Zoom and did this blessing for my birth, and lit a candle as soon as my labor started. And So we sent a message to all of them to say, hey, can everybody do a meditation at 9 p.m., just visualizing my labor happening and, or my, you know, my birth happening that night. And so at like 9 p.m., I was in the bath with this Foley and everybody was meditating on my simple, beautiful, natural birth happening that night. And the Foley came out and I dilated to 4 centimeters and my labor went on for 6 hours actively. And then I lied down and it stopped. So I went to the hospital. I didn't really have any other choice. And again, was so supported. Thank God for Rivka and Bria. Bria joined me at the hospital. And this is where everything shifted, I think, for me as a mother, and realizing the daughter that I have and how it's no longer about me and it's now all about her. Where, you know, I'm very much somebody, I'm like, take all natural herbs. I never take medication. I never take a Tylenol, or even if I have a headache, a migraine, like I'm really sort of, I don't use the medical system in that way. I use herbs. And so being at the hospital was really challenging for me, but I was like, you know what, if I go in with this perspective of hating where I am, that's not going to help my process or help my relationship even with the doctors. Because then, yeah, I kind of was like that during the NST test, the non-stress test, and my relationship with the resident there and the doctor there was very distant and cold and sort of frustrating. So I went in with a new perspective. And when I got there, I was just, you know, I practiced a lot of gratitude. And when I got there, I was just very grateful that I had nurses there, I had doctors there, I had people with experience, and that I had people with different perspectives than me that could help me through, because the perspective that I had, you know, there was unable to deliver, with the pun intended. So I was introduced to the nurses, and even the resident that was there the day before was there as well that day. And we had a very negative experience at first, because she was kind of like, you know, stop asking questions about this Foley. Like, you've been here asking questions all night. If you want it, and put it in. If not, then just go. And she was just really, it was really difficult. So I addressed it when she was then going to be my resident delivering my baby. So I said, you know, like, I know we have different perspectives. I know that you see your perspective as right. And I just want you to respect that I see my perspective as working for me. And right now I need your help, you know, and you're working on my body with my baby. So let's find a middle ground. And I want to hear everything that you have to say. And as in return, if you can hear everything that I'm feeling and what I'd like to do, and that'll help us find a good middle ground to travel on. And it completely shifted the energy there, which was amazing. The nurse that I had, her name was Emily, which was my first niece. And, you know, so I asked her if I could call her Emilichka, which is the name I call my niece. And that brought like some humor into the space. And the midwife also suggested, look, she said that ask for room 6. It was a room that was made specifically for the midwives, and it was gorgeous. It was huge, with this panoramic view of Montreal with the sunset and sunrise, and a jacuzzi in the bathtub. So that was great. And then she also said, you know, they don't bring it out for anybody, and they probably don't know where it is, but insist on getting a wireless monitor. They have them, a portable monitor, because I'm also a dancer. And so the thought of being connected to a monitor was horrifying for me. I needed to be moving around. So they found me the portable monitor. And then she also told me that they have this attachment that they can put on the bed that I can hang on, because I love to hang. And I knew that would help in releasing any like pressure that I would have during the contractions. So I got all of that, and they broke my water when I got there, and I went into like 8 hours of active labor with intense contractions. I was hanging, and I was all these positions and going crazy in these moving between the back and hanging. And Bria was there holding me and stretching out my ribs and my chest, and you know, it was super consistent. And the doctor came in, and when the doctor came in to check me, I lied down and they stopped. And she checked me, and she saw that I got to 4.5. I think I opened about half a centimeter during those 8 hours, which was pretty disheartening. And that Nappy's head was still 2 centimeters above my cervix, so it still wasn't putting any pressure on my cervix, push me down, push it, not to open it up. So I was like, okay, well, what are my options? I had Rivka on the phone, as I wanted support in knowing how I can move forward from here. And the doctor suggested that I get some oxytocin, which would mean that I would be connected to an IV. And, you know, as much as I wanted it to be a natural labor, I wanted to avoid a cesarean at all costs. So I took that option and felt very good about taking the option and having heard sort of all the perspectives that were on the table and the guidance that I had from the amazing people around me. So I took the IV, and wasn't so bad being on the portable monitor because I could still move around and get in the bath and everything. And the contractions intensified again for another 10 hours or 12 hours, maybe 14 hours. And the amazing thing is that the doctors and the nurses really listened to me in terms of letting me go through it. They didn't come to, the nurse came to check on me to make sure that it was good, but I seemed to be going through all the phases that they were expecting me to go through. And so the doctors really just let me go through it, you know, which was quite surprising and really beautiful. I feel like I went through it all. I even got to this phase, which I know I remember seeing my friend go through when I delivered her baby. And the nurse was like, "You're in the transition phase. It's great. You're almost at pushing," because I almost gave up. You know, I was like, I don't know if I can do this anymore. The contractions were so consistent, like every, I don't remember, like 30 seconds or something, or maybe more. And I was just in the bath, like almost giving up, but like, okay, pushing's coming. You know, the nurse was like, it's next. You're in transition. This is great. You can do it. Bria was super supportive. I was like, okay. And then the doctors came in, and my cervix was still at 4.5 centimeters, and her head was still 2 centimeters above my cervix. So nothing changed. And now, what it had been 24 hours at the hospital. That's not including the night before that I was in like with contractions all night at home, plus the 2.5 weeks of stop and start labor before that. So I was exhausted.
Yeah,
and
sure. I remember,
and I remember,
you were really tired.
Yeah. And I felt like I think also you were saying to me, like, you know, there's kind of two things here. Either Nafi's gotten her. Oh, I remember actually the night before, 2 nights before, maybe I got to the hospital. You're like, or maybe a few days before that, say maybe she's gotten herself in a funky position. I think we were talking about that about the squiggling during the contractions. Like maybe, you know, go through that series. What was it that you gave me, the like 3 positions I could go into a circuit?
Yeah.
So what's it called? There's a name for it, right?
Mile circuit.
Yeah, the mile circuit. So I did that even during the contractions at the hospital. I did that like the night before I left. I kept on doing those positions, sort of help her get into a better position. And you're like, okay, so there's 2 things here. Either she's gotten herself into a wonky position and she's just decided that she's not coming down, or you're still holding on to something, you know, subconsciously that's keeping you tight, that's not allowing you to open. So, you know, if she's not going to come down, then, you know, obviously I think we'd have to go for a cesarean. But if it's me that's holding on, then maybe the epidural would actually allow me to just relax. So even though I never wanted to do an epidural, I even skipped every chapter in every book I read about epidural, because I thought to myself, I'm never doing that. There I was getting an
never
epidural.
Say never.
Never say never. So I was there on the bed with oxytocin being pumped into me, continuing contractions, and getting the epidural. and the guy saying, hold still, don't move, and like, but I'm having a contraction, what do you mean don't move? So they put the epidural in me, and I went to sleep. I slept for, I guess, 4 hours with the epidural in me, in one of the positions that, like, from the mile circuit, I think with my leg up, hoping that she would switch her position. And the oxytocin continued to create contractions and push and or like pressure her down, and she didn't move. So the doctors came in and woke me up, and were so sympathetic and so wonderful. It actually was 2 doctors that came in because they were switching shifts, and they just sort of sat next to me and allowed Rivka to come on the phone, and Bria was there, and we all just had a discussion about what everybody is thinking is going on. And the doctors thought that her head was probably just too big for my pelvis, and she, at a certain point just decided to stop pushing her, or stop allowing herself to come down. And that kind of felt like something was true in that, and everybody just explained to me the situation, and I didn't feel any pressure from anybody in terms of go this way or go that way. I just was, there was such a strong space held for me between Bria and Rivka and my naturopath, also Anusha, who I feel like were just really there holding space for me and giving me guidance, that I felt like I made the decisions 100% clearly. Even though I was in a super intense state, I felt very clear in making the decision without regret, and without feeling any pressure from the hospital and their perspective. And the doctors were, just saying, like, one of the doctors said she had triplets and her belly was as big as my belly. So my baby's pretty big. I didn't care that my baby was big. I didn't care if I tore a lot. It's not that I wanted her to come out through my vagina, but I also wanted her to be healthy, and it felt like that was the only option. And in that, because of COVID, also I was only allowed one person in the room, so I had chose Bria. For me personally, that whole pre-birth labor, active labor, is very much a woman's thing. So even though my husband was holding space for me at home, like staying up for those 28 hours, praying and everything, it felt for me that it made more sense for Bria to be with me in the room. But since the cesarean was happening, that's where I felt my husband could come. So he got to come, which was awesome, because I also wanted him to be there when Nafi came out. But with the COVID restrictions, he wouldn't have been able to be there until after she was already out. So in this case, I kind of got my wish, where I wanted Bria there during the active labor, and I wanted Binyam to be there once she emerged. So he came in like super quickly, and I was down in the room after an hour, and they put another spinal in me, another anesthesia, which was pretty intense. And then I was lying down there, and in like 10 seconds, Nafi was on my arm, on my chest. And the amazing thing is that the way Binyam was sitting, there was a TV monitor, I guess, there for somebody to watch, who was, behind the blue curtain, but he could see the TV. So he actually saw them bring Nafi out of my stomach, which I think is a very unique thing to get to see. And they brought her to me as fast as possible and put her on my chest. And that was the most amazing experience, to just have her melt on me. I do feel that one thing was challenging was, I had said to them, I'd asked them to I wanted the umbilical cord to be kept attached for as long as possible. And if it was at home, I would have kept it attached for a couple of hours until it stopped or I don't know, until I felt it was time. But I had asked them to not cut it right away and to let it stop pulsing. And they told me they would. but Binyam saw that they cut it right away in that monitor, and that just that's one disappointment I have. But I've worked through it because I know that, the baby comes out, she's crying because she's coming out in a non-natural way and is a bit frantic, and they still have to go in my stomach and move my organs around and get my placenta. So to have an umbilical cord connected at that same time, it could potentially cause unwanted movement, is my theory. So that's why they cut it right away. But I do wish they would have just told me that it would be complicated to keep it attached. But anyway, whatever. that happened. And she's healthy. I've heard some stories after of babies that did try and push through and couldn't get their heads through and suffocated, or just stories I definitely didn't want to hear before. But she's healthy. Her cone head is gone. It's round now. But yeah, she did have a bigger than average head. And that's my story.
So what would you say is the most important thing that you've learned from your birth journey?
Definitely to listen openly without restricting what might need to happen by your own your own perspective, or like the way that you see it. I think, well, I mean, it's hard to, it's like mothering is what I've learned right now, is it's a very fine balance between your instincts and what you know and what you want is right, and what your child knows intuitively and what they think is right, and how you can find a middle ground between the two of you. It's no longer just about me and my perspective. Maybe Nafi's going to grow up and she's going to really be into the medical system and really believe that that's the way that is best for her health. Whereas that's super contradictory to what I believe, but that's what she believes, and somehow that started there, is that I need to listen to her and also listen to myself and guide her, but still allow her to guide me, and without resistance. And that, I think, is one of the most tricky parts about mothering. Like, even now I'm going through that with how she needs to sleep versus like my own opinion of how I want to keep her, I want to carry her all the time, or I want to breastfeed her to sleep, or these perspectives that I have for attachment parenting, I guess it's called. But then she's not, maybe, is she getting the best sleep? She sometimes isn't feeling like she's getting or seeming to get the best sleep. But anyway, it's finding the balance. I see it always kind of as this teeter-totter, and like finding that moment where you guys can both be at an equilibrium, balanced, where both your sides are heard, and how you find that middle ground. That was, I think, the first lesson I've had in my birth experience, was the first lesson I've had in parenting like that. And there's many more to come.
Oh yeah, there's many more. Because what you learn as a parent is that you're not producing a clone. If all our job was just to produce someone exactly like ourselves, well, I mean, it's easy to force people to do things, but if you're actually having that balance, like you talked about, it's so much more challenging and so much more rewarding in the end. You're just nourishing this person that's not you.
Exactly. And guiding them, but being open to them also guiding you. Which, yeah.
So if you had someone come to you newly pregnant and she was wondering about her birth choices, what to do, who to, just someone without any idea, doesn't know anyone, doesn't have a community, what would you suggest to her?
I would definitely suggest to, close her eyes, visualize how she would like it to be, how she sees it to be in her perfect scenario, and then do the same exercise to like release that and somehow just know that that totally the opposite could happen, and to be okay with that somehow. To like, I was meditating a lot on what I wanted to happen, how I wanted to see it, how it was smooth. um, but I think I needed to do more also meditation on letting go and allowing it to be however it needs to be somehow. And to then for sure have somebody that you feel close to that isn't connected to the medical system, like a doula, or a doula, I guess is what you guys are, which I think is really important. I was so blessed. Bria is like a sister to me, and her family, I'm very, very close with her family. So that it was a no-brainer. She was just like, yeah, I'm with you throughout the whole thing for sure. If it wasn't for Bria, I don't know that I would have chosen to have a doula, because I had midwives. But what I did learn is that the midwives are stuck inside of protocols, and I know that their perspective is to have these mother-led natural births, but they have to answer to the public health system or whatever it's, I don't know what it's called, but they have to. There's certain things that they need to do to keep their jobs, I guess.
Yeah.
That are part of their
And
protocol. And
things they're not allowed to
sorry,
do as well. It's basically,
exactly. Yeah, things they're not allowed to do, things they are allowed to do, things they have to do,
they
things
have
that
to
also
do.
they become, like for example, after the birth, she didn't get to her birth weight right away, which they were so stressed out about it and put so much stress on me, which stopped my milk from coming in because I was so stressed and scared. And I mean, it was just all these things. And I learned a couple of days later when I spoke to my original midwife, and she said, like, we're actually, if something were to happen to the baby and we didn't make you do X, Y, and Z, like with formula and blah, 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 then we are responsible, and they somehow, I guess, like have to pay for the issue that arises. So they're accountable for certain things, which puts a lot of fear on their work, which makes them do things that put a lot of fear into the air, which is against the practice. So yeah, to answer your question, I would say get a doula, or at least have somebody who's very close to you, who's very well educated and versed in birth and all the things that could happen, and be there to support you and hold space for you, and hold your hand essentially through the whole thing without being tied down to preventative measures. I feel like our medical system is all focused on preventative measures, and preventing things that might happen inevitably creates fear, because you're looking at these possible horrible things rather than looking at the smooth, great way that God made us able to do all these crazy things.
So do you have a community of other women who have birthed in the past year?
I wouldn't say necessarily community, but I have spoken to a lot of women. Yeah, I've spoken to a lot of women who, during, are you referring also to during the pandemic? During the
No, I'm
pandemic?
not actually. The next question is actually about COVID. No, I'm just, generally, even in spite of okay, we have a pandemic now, but even before the pandemic, I know that new mothers were particularly isolated. That sense of community often isn't there, especially with a birth story like yours, where you don't fit into, oh, I just went into the hospital and had an epidural and a C-section, or yeah, I had a natural home birth. That's what I wanted. Like you had the whole gamut of experiences, and you're happy with it. You came out the other end being secure. So I'm wondering, first of all, if you do have a community of other women who have birthed, and how you feel when you're sharing your birth story with other mothers, and how you feel about, do they share their birth stories? I feel like there's a lot of shame out there in the natural birth community about, yes, I had a C-section.
Yeah, for sure. I don't have a necessarily community of people who've birthed in the past year, but I definitely, I mean, I know a lot of moms and I have a lot of friends who are mothers, and I've been surprised how much people don't share at all. And, it's funny because even though I'm happy with everything I went through, I do feel like I got to experience everything except for pushing from a natural birth. But um, I still obviously I had to go through some trauma with NAFI, trauma release and healing with NAFI, both on her end from kinks and things that she had in her body from the long experience of labor, and also like being pushed unnaturally with oxytocin and epidurals and all that stuff, and then also my body, a dancer's body, with this pain in my back from a spinal and an epidural in my and then just like also the connection, that natural connection you get when the baby comes out, that spiral that she goes through, and then that spiral that she goes through and then comes onto you. There's like this release that happens that we didn't get to have. So I've seen a lot of I've had a lot of osteopath appointments, both for NAFI and me. I probably went almost every week for a month or two, or had one come to my house and also went. And that I also would recommend to anybody who has a C-section, even if you have natural birth, I would still recommend it. I found that it was extremely helpful. But for sure, for a C-section, there was one moment that the osteopath worked on that spiral with NAFI and then put NAFI on me at the end. And it's the first time I felt NAFI melt like that on my body, and release. And it was so powerful. And everything changed between our relationship after that moment, and our flow. So, but I remember looking after I gave birth, sometimes I'd look on Facebook, people I know that gave birth, and I'd see them, oh, this is my baby, their post of like, this is my baby, she came on this day, she's healthy, or he, whatever. And I remember always thinking like, oh, they're so lucky they had, natural birth. Or I kept on having these sort of envious thoughts.
Yeah.
Of like, and seeing them breastfeed or this or that. And me, I had a couple struggles with it, even though we're totally great now. And I remember feeling very envious of like, oh, there's this and that. And I finally shared my story on my Instagram, I guess a week ago or 2 weeks ago. And I was so surprised that I think all of the women that I had seen that gave birth, that I had that feeling of, oh, they had a natural birth, all of them had C-sections.
Yeah, that's the thing, because they're hiding it. And that is why I'm so proud and full of respect for you to be sharing your story, because I know that there's part of you that's grieving that you didn't get the dream that you were having. And that's going to be something that you'll live with forever. But that you're brave enough to go out there and say, this happened and this happened and this happened, and this is my baby's birth, and we're in this life together. And you I think probably changed a lot of women's beliefs about themselves, because there's a lot of shame involved in having a C-section. And that you brought that story out, that just the fact that you were imagining their crazy natural births, and then that you brought that story out, and that now they're coming forth, it means something.
Yeah, and I didn't feel any shame against my story, but I felt, it's definitely, even at my mother's blessing ceremony, I'd written in the email inviting everyone, like, I'd like you to share, positive stories with me so I can have that in my perspective and not be focusing on fearful stories. But even my wording in that, I had some people who wrote back saying like, I even though I had a C-section, I still see my story as positive, or even though my baby was premature, I still see it as positive because I have a family. And I realized that my wording in saying, please share only positive stories, was sort of shaming other stories, because every story is positive if the baby comes out alive and the mother's alive,
Well,
whether it's through C-section.
honestly, the last person that I interviewed had a miscarriage at 16 weeks. And you know what?
Yeah.
even her story, like our
Right.
women's stories have to be shared. I think that's the bottom line. We have
Yeah.
to share our stories and build that
Yeah.
power amongst ourselves. And you know, whatever it is, maybe to stop thinking in that way of, positive or negative,
Right.
and just like, this is my experience, and this is your
Yeah.
experience, and let's build on that.
Yeah, that's true. I remember reading in one of the books that I was reading. I'm blanking on the name. Sorry, baby brain. Um, is she was saying, like, people share these stories of pain and having so much pain and how horrible their experience was, but people rarely share also this natural birth. Because if somebody were to say, "Oh, my birth was natural and I didn't have any pain," people would go like, "Yeah, right, you're totally lying," or something like that. Which I thought was interesting. You also don't hear very many stories of women not having pain. Um, but I think my baby needs to feed. You can. Anyway, so it's also important to share. Yeah, yeah, I think it is. It's important to share all stories
All
and
the
to
stories.
see the positive. Yeah, see the positive in it. And yeah, I was surprised. Those women, they wrote to me and said, I can't believe you had that experience, because I didn't feel shame, but I know that because I had delivered a baby, alone in Hawaii in the middle of nowhere, people had written to me being like, "I can't wait to hear your birth story after
Yeah.
the story I heard of you delivering a baby." So there was a little bit of these expectations from others that I was going to have had this amazing home birth,
Yeah,
So that was a
exactly.
little bit hard to break that.
Yeah.
But I am very proud to have shared it and have those friends who wrote back saying like, "Wow, I'm so happy you shared that, because I'm very shamed by my story."
Yeah, exactly. It's so powerful.
Yeah, I have one other woman who told me that she has felt unable to share her story with anybody because nobody wants to listen. She said she feels like nobody really wants to hear what I went through, and she feels like she just can't talk to anybody. And she said she would love to share her story with me. And she felt she was forced a lot in the
Yeah.
hospital to, get the epidural or to do this or to do that, and she felt like
Yeah.
she wasn't left with any choice.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm also very thankful that you were there with me, Rivka, as I felt like I had. Sometimes the doctors can be very persuasive, and their perspective can, when you're in that state, of course, you want your baby to come out alive, and they can kind of make you feel like if you don't do this, your baby might not come out alive.
Exactly. Yeah.
Um, so just having you on the phone and knowing you're a second away by call, to be able to get that other perspective of like, well, some of that is true, some of that isn't true. But that's why I would say it's really important to have a doula, or
Have that
someone with a lot of
person.
experience
Yeah.
available.
I think your experience was definitely very seriously affected by the COVID fact.
Yeah.
Just the support that you didn't have, the fear that happened when the midwives were having to change your ideas of a home birth, and all of those things definitely affected your birth journey.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
But
Do you
I
want me to
mean,
go on more? Oh.
that's the reality for so many women. This past year and a half, honestly,
Yeah.
it's been a real year of, I would say, struggle for birthing mums.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, if you want to just mention how you felt. And
Yeah, I definitely agree. I remember you saying at one point, I remember I was going for a walk, at 41 and a half weeks, wanting to get my labor starting so I didn't have to go to the hospital, and talking to you and, reviewing over that moment when she was squiggling frantically during the contractions. And I remember you saying that you've been speaking to a lot of doulas who had also noticed that babies have been reacting differently, or like strangely, or not wanting to come out. And I've mentioned that now to a few other women, especially women who have come forth, sharing that they had these C-sections. And I actually, now that you're talking about it, I know quite a few women who have been pregnant over the past year and a half and given birth. And I think I only know one who ended up having a natural birth out of all of them. And, it may just be that the babies just feel like scared to come out, or the moms are, we're unsure. I think I found two things really difficult. One is the postpartum. That's something, first of all, I feel postpartum is not spoken about enough. And yes, I've heard, postpartum's hard, but I didn't even know what postpartum meant. I thought postpartum meant what it sounds like, of like, the feeling of, your baby and you being disconnected for the first time, and, the emotional trauma that could come about with that. But I didn't really understand how intense it is and how much support you need during postpartum, and how much you don't get from the medical
especially
system.
during COVID, honestly.
Especially during
How
COVID.
much you don't get without even the extra kind of added excuses of COVID, for sure.
Exactly. So my midwives weren't allowed to come to do home visits at postpartum. They could come once, and they were only supposed to come for 15 minutes. So that meant that I was supposed to do a Zoom call with them, and I personally didn't want my baby to be around my phone or computer as much as possible. So there I am, having to put a computer next to me and my baby, and have my baby look at a screen, which I didn't want to do, for an hour as my postpartum a checkup. And then she's supposed to come to the house for 15 minutes. What can you do in 15 minutes?
Yeah, exactly.
And she's only supposed to come once instead of however many times. Usually there's come 5 or 6 times, I think.
Yeah.
So that was traumatic. And then again, my family lives in Vancouver, so they couldn't, and they were unable to come due to COVID reasons. And you're not supposed to have a bubble. At that point, I wasn't even allowed a bubble of friends, so it was just me and my husband in the house. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it was definitely an extreme of that kind of alienation that many mothers feel in modern times. And I mean, I'm just hoping that this whole COVID experience will give us as women and as mothers the power to change. Because if we haven't changed it, we haven't changed it up until now. Hopefully this will be the extra push that we need to really change it. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted you to share your story, because these stories need to be told. The judgment that's behind all of these stories, is wrong. And whatever your story is, it needs to be shared, and we need to pull together so that we can just not be so isolated.
Yeah, totally. Not be so isolated, and also stand unified and with a solidarity. Also, maybe, I don't know, maybe it's extreme, but I feel like changing the medical system a little bit. I don't know, maybe it's extreme, but
not even a little bit. I would say changing the medical system a lot. There's so many things to change. Yeah.
And it's just if we're going to have a midwifery practice, then it needs to be a midwifery practice. And
exactly. I mean, that's the thing, that the system, it's not allowed to be, because the system doesn't want it to be. If there was an actual midwifery practice, then I would be out there practicing midwifery, but no one wants people out there practicing midwifery if they're not, under the thumb of the directives. And I know that there are also traditional birth attendants out there possibly listening to the podcast, and more power to them. They're in situations where they can go in and provide care, and that's amazing and wonderful. But in some places it's easier, and in some places it's way more restrictive.
Yeah.
So
totally. And it's interesting, because I keep on going through it in my mind, what if I was in Ethiopia? My baby's half Ethiopian. What if I was in Ethiopia at the time? Would I have had the same experience? Would I have?
Who knows? Right.
Would the fear was it the fear that stopped her from pushing down? Was it that like biologically my genetic hips pelvis is not big enough for her genetic head or whatever, like, was it a genetic thing or was it the fear? We just don't know, and you'll never know. And that's why I think what you're saying is so valid, is that we shouldn't be shamed if we have a C-section, because we don't know why it happened necessarily. The doctors kept on saying to me, well, with these statistics, there's this many deaths of this many, like, and I'm like, yeah, but your statistics are taken from in a country where fear and the medical system is a certain way, and the preventative, you're putting preventative measures. So the statistics don't make sense.
No,
for
they
me,
don't make any sense.
They're not telling me anything. If you told me statistics of like the women in the jungle, then maybe I'll listen.
I mean, the thing is, though, the bottom line is, for me, with you, like, I was there throughout this whole experience with you, and I have to say, the bottom line for me was, if you had just, like, during one of those dances, just like gone down and squatted and started grunting, then I would know that, like, that's what your body is doing, that's what your body's talking about, that's what's happening. But for some reason, and we'll never know why, that wasn't what was happening. So, and like, I've experienced enough birth situations in countries like Ethiopia where, there isn't the ability to go to the hospital. And like, we lose mums and babies in other parts of the world. So who knows, right? Just who knows?
Yeah.
We'll never know. The important thing is, let's live with what we have. Let's accept our stories. Let's not shame each other, and let's pull together so we can change some of the more ludicrous things about the medical establishment.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm with you on that for sure. And I think it's exactly what you're saying. It starts by sharing and having that community. And I don't know what it is not in COVID, but I don't have any new mom friends, because I didn't have any, like, there was no, pre-labor classes or whatever that they would usually have at the midwife center. Those were all canceled. We didn't even have them on Zoom. They didn't even prepare them. So I never met another mom that was pregnant while I was pregnant, which is
so alienating.
Yeah, totally.
So I'm going to wrap up. I'm sure that we could talk for another few hours. And I think we should. And I think I'm actually starting thinking now about creating a community for all of us, because we need to have that community. But in the meantime, I'd like you to wrap up just with one word for our listeners. What is the one word that you would want us all to share?
One word.
Okay, you could have maybe one or two, but like,
like, I think, like, let go. That was let go. Like, for me, that was something that I was challenged with. I was good at letting go of fear, but letting go of control and letting go of judgment, just letting go. So letting go of shame, letting go of judgment, letting go of all of those things that we need to let go of. I think we as women somehow need to feel in control, or need to hold it together and be strong. And we also just need to let go and show our vulnerability and show our weaknesses, and yeah, that's it. Let go.
Thank you.
As it came to mind anyway.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rivka. That was wonderful to share. It's healing in itself.
It really was. Yes, so healing and so powerful. Thank you so much.